All right, so welcome to our DMC 101. This is part 3, and we are going to have a little bit of a discussion today about explaining what DMC actually is in red, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the data and the policies that kind of have kind of created or brought us to the place that we are now with some of the terms that we use. And then we will look at how those terms and data apply to us locally. And then we will start moving towards the racial equity part of our DMC work. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to start with a video, and then we will go into some of the other stuff I talked about. So here we go.
The numbers about, Black youth incarcerated, they're staggering. The impact of the system is undeniable.
The numbers don't lie. They tell the story. And so the story is that the system is disproportionate.
There is clearly discrepancies and disparities.
The national picture is definitely pushing race to the front.
I don't think we can even begin to understand what's going on in the juvenile justice system today if we're not talking about race.
When you have a child who comes into the system and the people that are being prosecuted look just like them, it really undermines their faith in the system.
It's toxic to the legitimacy of the whole system if it's not treating everyone fairly.
So what are we achieving here?
We own this collectively, so we all have a part in how do we make this better.
And it can be done. Good teachers, effective teaching, all of this is possible. It happens in the suburbs, why not in the cities?
We need an open-minded discussion of how best we can impact our kids and our system. I'm not sure that has always happened in Massachusetts.
We need to be vigilant and be aware of fairness issues as well as the results that we're producing.
So the analogy that I've used is an assembly line. We can all do a really good job at our workstation and still have a lousy system. To the extent that we're all working together, that we have shared vision and shared ownership up and down that assembly line, we have a chance. And our department has declared that a real priority.
At this point in time, that the juvenile justice system in particular is entering young people's lives is a point that matters a great deal, where the stakes are extremely high. We can't afford to blow it.
Massachusetts has great reason to be proud of how we take care of our children. We lead the nation on educational achievement, healthcare coverage for children, and overall quality of life. Despite some of these incredible advances, disparities exist for some of our youth. The youth population in Massachusetts is 67% white and 33% youth of color. When you get to the youth held on bail, known as the detained population, everything flips. 70% are youth of color and 30% are white.
Right now, children of color in Massachusetts are burdened in a lot of different ways. So they're much more likely to live in high poverty communities. They're much more likely to go to underperforming schools. They're much more likely to be subjected to the most severe kind of discipline if they're in those schools, even for the same kinds of behavior. And they're much more likely to end up in our juvenile justice system.
While 9% of white children in the Commonwealth live in poverty, That number rises to 32% for African American children and 38% for Latino youth.
Kids who come before the Massachusetts Juvenile Court have experienced high degrees of trauma. And unfortunately, we know that when young people come into detention, that itself can be a traumatic experience. We want to prevent those children from being re-traumatized unnecessarily, especially if they can be served in their own communities.
Our system leaders, from the police to the courts to our service delivery systems, all acknowledge that racial and ethnic disparities, often referred to as RED, exist in the Massachusetts juvenile justice system.
As a regional director in Boston for 11 years, I was responsible for the Metro Youth Service Center, and the detention programs and the committed programs in that building are almost exclusively minority and have been for years. And that doesn't reflect Suffolk County.
Once they get there, they're more likely to penetrate deeply into that system. And that can lead to other things like adult incarceration, unemployment, not going to college, all sorts of negative things.
While data collection by race and ethnicity could be improved at many decision points in Massachusetts, there is enough data to see that disparities exist at every point in the juvenile justice system.
You see double the representation of minority youth at the point of arrest than you do in the population as a whole. Again, knowing that delinquency, fights, using drugs, skipping school, all those things happen across the board. It happens in white communities, it happens in black communities, it happens in affluent communities, it happens in poor communities, and yet you see this disparity right at the front door of the system.
Over the last 10 years in Massachusetts, the use of detention has decreased dramatically. But this decrease has not been happening at the same rate for all youth. The rate of decrease has been sharpest for whites. This means that racial disparities at pre-trial detention are actually increasing in Massachusetts.
What you then see is the disparity gets greater at the next point. Right? Now when you're talking about the decision to prosecute, it gets greater. Then at the point of disposition, and you're talking about which kids get on probation versus which kids get placed, the disparity grows even further. So at each point in time, we see a bigger and bigger population of youth of color who are getting the most severe sanction as we move along. And that can represent all kinds of things, but it's certainly not something that we can ignore as being an issue.
We know that many of the disparities exist in our systems and communities before youth even come into contact with a police officer.
What we've learned over the last many years through the data is that the school system is often a feeder for youth of color into the juvenile justice system, as well as child welfare system.
Out-of-school suspension predicts dropout, right? And out-of-school suspension is what we're using to address our non-drug, non-criminal, non-violent offenses, right? We're not talking about guns, we're not talking about bullying, we're not talking about fighting. Yet 2/3 of our out-of-school suspensions deal only with that. And that's also where we see our greatest racial disparities. Black students are 3.7 times more at risk of an out-of-school suspension than their white peers in Massachusetts. For Latino students, who are 3.1 times as likely as their white peers to be suspended, that's actually double the national disparity.
You won't always be able to prove that there was different treatment or an intent to discriminate on the part of a teacher or a police officer. But what you see in the statistics is this much higher tendency to perceive something as a serious behavioral issue and then to punish more harshly given equal kinds of misbehavior.
It's important to know, right? It didn't used to be this way. Our discipline rates and disparities did not used to look this bad. And it's also important to know it doesn't have to be this way.
There is no one cause of the disparities that exist in our system. Given that decisions by actors outside our system can increase racial and ethnic disparities within it, we have the responsibility to look deeply at our system and ask, are we doing all we can to combat and not perpetuate disproportionality? The way disparities can be seen most clearly in the justice system is by calculating the relative rate index. This number represents the ratio of any given racial population compared to the white population at the same point in the system, then balanced against the Commonwealth's general youth population ratios. In 2014, the black detention RRI was 7-1. A black youth was 7 times more likely to be detained than a white youth in Massachusetts.
As I've seen here in Massachusetts, looking at the data, to be able to look at each of those decision points with scrutiny, to be able to think about equity at each of those points and say, who are the kids coming to this point and are we treating them the same? The best that we can do is at each point in time have a very deliberate purpose.
Someone might ask, why does it matter? As long as crime and detention continue to fall, who cares if the numbers aren't always evenly aligned? The answer is that this imbalance impacts us all, people in and out of the system, in negative ways.
The system itself is not a benign intervention, not because it's full of bad people, but because it tends to disconnect kids from the things that are really important and which help them live normal teenager lives.
It's a disruption for their family. It's a disruption towards their education, any pro-social activities that they had going on in the community, any resources like mental health treatment, counseling, all of that is disrupted. And even if it's for a short time, to expect that young person to get back out into the community and just pick up like nothing ever happened, you can't expect that to happen.
Detention takes kids away from their families, schools, and support systems and exposes them to negative peer influences. Despite the best efforts of system workers, a stay in detention is often a traumatic experience for youth. These experiences increase the odds that kids will reoffend and ultimately penetrate deeper into the system. Study after study shows this.
It's about a child. It's about their future, to ensure that they don't fall victim to the system and become a person who just cycles through the juvenile system into the adult system.
Our system is actively, albeit unintentionally, contributing to the public safety challenges in our Black and Latino communities. Disparate treatment of Black and Latino youth that leads to unnecessary arrests, prosecution, and incarceration imposes an avoidable financial burden on our state, vital funding that could be spent more productively in these same communities. It's a question of common sense, justice, fairness, and equal application of the law. It's also about building Massachusetts' future.
If we want a strong Commonwealth, then we're going to have to address these disparities, and we're going to have to begin to support children of color in the same way that we support white children. Give people the capacity to reach their goals and be vibrant contributors in our communities.
If we're disparate in our treatment of entire communities, relying more heavily on interventions that stunt their growth and potential for a productive life, then we are diminishing future prosperity across our state. Youth represent that future. This is the moment to give all our children a shot at equality and a future that is fair and just.
We can't throw up our hands and say this is too big of a problem for us to tackle. And we can't say that, because of, poverty and educational inequity and structural racism and all of the other contributing factors, that the juvenile justice system just can't do anything about this.
It's always, well, you're doing this. Well, the police are bad because the police are going to those neighborhoods and they're arresting all the Black kids while they're letting the white kid just go do whatever they want. That's really not a productive way to enter into a conversation.
It's not about casting blame on police or casting blame at other parts of our society around the disparities that we see. They're deep within our country and they go far beyond the justice system. But what I think people are acknowledging in a way that perhaps has felt more controversial to acknowledge in the past is that we have a long way to go to ensure equity in this system. We have an opportunity now to not just acknowledge that, but to really dig deeper and to really come up with ideas that allow us to address that much more head on.
Hello, is everybody there?
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted us to start with something like that to kind of set the conversation and the tone. So what did you all think about that? Did that kind of put things in perspective for you a little bit? I can't hear everybody or see everybody. Looks like we have some new people too. Hi, good to see you. Anybody with thoughts? Unmute yourselves if you can.
Did appreciate what was said right at the end. Is one of the issues that we deal with is, you know, it's hard to control what happened years ago and those type of things, especially if those employees are no longer with us. But being in law enforcement, we would like to think that we're making changes and getting better, more educated, and you know, it's good to see forward, like you said, instead of looking and complaining about what happened, but how do we improve from here?
Anybody else? I liked how, you know, it was a perspective of it's not just law enforcement, it's the whole system itself that has to do the work, not just one group at a time. And it's also the community that has to do the work at the same time. That it's really hard to I think one of the ideas a lot of people have is we do, you know, once this one group gets it together, then we'll do the work. Once, you know, once the community cleans up, then we'll make the change, or vice versa. And really what needs to happen is that everybody does it together at the same time. So, well, thank you for being willing to listen to that. So we are getting ready to get started with all of our data stuff we're going to talk about today. Okay. So again, we are on part 3. So we are, let's see if you don't want to work for me. Okay. So historically, and I think they talked about it a little bit, this conversation about DMC started, really, it's a relatively new idea in 1988. And it was focused on disproportionate minority confinement. So that was really about young people being in the detention centers and the facilities we were talking about like when we talked about the history of DMC, that people were in those houses of refuge, or those homes, I think is what a lot of people call them. And that they were, when people looked at the data, you know, like they shared before, it was overwhelmingly minority filled. And so that was the focus of DMC. Then DMC in 1992 became a requirement and part of the OJJDP, or the Department of Justice. And so it became something that states had to start reporting data on. And then in 1992 as well, the Annie E. Casey Foundation started doing a lot of juvenile justice and delinquency work and examining what the data was sharing nationally. And then in 2002, DMC became disproportionate minority contact, and which is what it was called when we wrote the grant. And then in 2018, it became racial and ethnic disparities, or RED. I actually like to use both because I think we want to talk about contact, but we also want to talk about racial and ethnic disparities. Does that give you all a little background? Thumbs up, thumbs down, say yes, say no.
Yes.
Okay. So here's a picture or a chart of what racial disparities look like. And this was done by the Sentencing Project. So in the video, they talked about the relative rate index. And what the relative rate index is, if you don't remember, it's about calculating the number of contacts or whatever the decision point is by race, and who or what numbers as they stack against the majority numbers are as the percentage. So you end up with a ratio, or what they call a relative rate index, which is the RRI again. So this chart is showing you juvenile arrest rates compared to African American RRI. So the RRI for African Americans is the black bars in the back, and then the national juvenile arrest rate is the blue line. And as you can see in this chart, the arrest rate is trending downwards. However, the African American RRI rate basically stays the same. So how is that possible when the numbers are consistently dropping? Question for the group. Don't all speak at once.
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
I said, how is it that the arrest rates can drop nationally, but the contact or the juvenile arrest rates for African Americans in this chart, the black bars in the back, basically remain the same, but the arrest rate for the national arrest rate of juveniles was in decline? Can you see the blue line? So how is it possible that we're seeing that? How does that happen? Is my question.
It's Kalia.
Yeah.
So my interpretation of that would be that even though there were fewer arrests, there were still more arrests of Black or African Americans.
That could definitely be a possibility. Any other thoughts?
Could it have something to do with diversion programs and stuff like that?
It could be that you could be seeing less African Americans being referred into diversion programs. Absolutely. So it could be instead of maybe a youth program or something like that that kids would have been in, well, now they're all going through the system instead of, what do you call it, being, instead of being like maybe more of a prevention program, is probably what you would more consider that to be.
So you said the blue line was adult arrest rates, right?
No,
Or
that's
total arrest rate.
this is all juveniles. Okay. So the blue line is the national juvenile arrest rate. The black bar in the back is the African American arrest rate. So while the whole country is going down, African Americans are basically staying the same.
Okay.
Yeah, yikes.
Yeah, I was thinking that could be reference to like similar to what she was saying on diversion programs, but that shouldn't matter whether or not it's Black youth or white youth or Hispanic or whatever the case may be.
Right.
I don't have an answer for that one for sure.
Right. And I think that's kind of part of the reason why we point this, or this is a good chart to point out, is that what it's saying is that we could be all doing the right thing and that the numbers don't actually change. And so we have to be intentional about addressing this is why DMC is what it is. This is a perfect example of it. And so how will this inform our work? So I'm going to show you now. Let me go. Okay, so if you all remember, not that long ago, we had a conversation about how we measure disparity. And so we measure disparity in terms of overrepresentation, disparate treatment, and unnecessary entry and movement deeper into the youth justice system. Those of you that we did this the very first meeting that we met, I don't know if you all remember this. And so this is important because I'm going to show you 3 examples of our work, of us showing overrepresentation, disparate treatment, and unnecessary entry and movement into the youth justice system specifically. Okay. So remember, the city of Kinston, there's 21,540 people, 67% are Black, 30% are white. Okay, and the school district in 2018, 2019, 8,512 kids, and we had almost 47% Black and 35% white primarily. So for Kenston, this is Kenston Police Department. This is not Kenston and Lenore. This is Kenston Police Department. So for us, disparate treatment is this. So this is how many people were referred to juvenile authority. So the blue is Black and the red is white. So this actual rate, which would be our ratio for this one category referred to juvenile authorities, this is 18 to 1, or this is one white for every one white referral to juvenile authorities, 18 Black people are referred to juvenile authorities by the Kinston Police Department. And this is over 4 years, remember, okay? And the second category on this one we're looking at is handled within the department and released. So this is for every one white contact that's made that the referral is handled within the department and released, 10 Black young people have that same outcome.
So that shows a positive statistic, does it not?
Well, yes, it does, in the fact that what we're saying is for everyone, but what we would like to see is less of the referred to juvenile, that we want to see more of the numbers and opposite. Does that make sense?
I'm just curious if the referred to juvenile, so sometimes police officers refer them to juvenile intake, and sometimes the parents themselves do, or it may involve a school official, and maybe somebody closer to the juvenile intake office would know better if they're involved in this conversation. But with us, if you send them as a referral, that's a positive thing. So instead of taking them through the juvenile process and before the court system, a deferral for us is either one, return them home to their parents to allow the parents to handle the situation, or refer them to other resources, whether it be mental health, school counseling, that type of thing. So with us, a deferral by our department is a good thing, which in that picture helps
But that's a deferral. So we're talking, what you're talking about is a deferral
and
versus
that's the second
referral.
column, right?
Right.
Is that the second?
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's
right.
what I was talking about. Those second two columns versus the first two columns.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And we should expect that it would still be more because you all are making more contacts with Black people in general, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yes. So what we want to see is we want to see that number increase.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Because what we're talking about really is a total. So over a course of 4 years, we've seen a contact of 20 or 19 white people. And we're seeing contact with close to 300 Black people.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we definitely have much more contact with that. And I think I mentioned one time before, I think a lot of that also has to do with poverty level and those type of things.
Absolutely.
We definitely interact with more Black youth age, 14 to 24 than any other demographic whatsoever.
Right. And I think you haven't gotten to see this data before, Janae, unless Keith or the chief shared it with you before. But this is something we've looked at before. And then and I will send you that. If Keith hasn't shared it with you, I'll share it with you before the next meeting. But anyway, the whole point of this is to go look. What we're looking at is how people are being treated as they go through the system. What do we need to do to make sure that people are treated as much as the same as possible, and making sure that we get equitable contacts with the system, making sure that we have the outcomes that we desire with the system. So our goal should be that we actually see this data flipped, that we see instead of 107, that we see more like, 170, we should see hopefully more like 170 handled within the department released and 108 being referred to juvenile authorities, which would then bring that ratio down, is what I'd like to see. Does that make sense, everybody? Thoughts? Okay.
I think that just depends on the type of, if it's a crime.
So, and we're going to actually look at some of the crimes, and then you will have a better understanding of what we're talking about too.
So, cool.
Any other thoughts? Okay, so let's move on. So this is overrepresentation, which we had a conversation about a little bit before. So what we're looking at here is, again, 93% of contacts with African Americans or Black people, and 6% of the total contacts are with white people. That's over. So, and why would that be overrepresentation? Because when we go back and look, the city of Kinston population is 67% Black, 30% white. So what we should be looking towards is that this overrepresentation actually more reflects what the population looks like. Does that make sense? No one? Anyone? Yes, Linnea, I understand. This is so much fun.
It makes sense.
Okay. And then, so the next piece is the unnecessary movement deeper into the justice system. So this is a chart where we are comparing referrals based on the officer. So if you are, so we tracked it according to SRO and just a regular officer. So for this first column, remember, the SRO accounts for the majority of this, or not the majority, but 32 of the total number of contacts. And then what's interesting is that SROs were responsible and referred to juvenile contact for more than handled within the department and released. So these would be school-based offenses, correct? If the SRO is having contact with people, yes. So then we would want to see more handled and released from the SROs than from regular officers, right? Thoughts? That would be the goal. Ooh, I know somebody's going to say something. Go ahead.
I think more of our crime we're seeing committed isn't necessarily in the schools,
right?
Which is why you kind of see that number. But yeah,
yeah. So what we would want, so again, this is the whole idea is for us to go, okay, so what data points should we be looking at? What decision points should we be looking to see what we can change? Is there something that we can say, hey, we want to set a goal to start working on this. So this means we need to maybe do more training with SROs to help them figure out what they can defer, right? Or what other community programs they can be sending people to for school-based offenses that aren't maybe violence related. And the same thing for handled within the department. How can we maybe start to get the outcome that we're seeing handled within the department and released with in the schools? Does that make sense?
Linnea, did we ever get and this may be a dated question because I'm kind of new getting back into this, the memorandum of understanding that we were putting together at the very beginning of yes. all of this, was that signed on by the school system, an agreement of what charges would, or what type of crimes would lead to charges or citations and what wouldn't?
You know what? I did not see that, but I assumed that was part of the PACS agreement.
Yes, ma'am. It sure was.
Right. And but I think that there was some. We need to review that. Let me say that. I haven't read the PACS agreement in probably about 2 years.
That just popped in my head as well.
But yes, we do need to follow up and read the PACS agreement, and then that's one of the outcomes we talked about in the data subcommittee, is for us to be able to read the tax agreement and then make recommendations to improve it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about this? One of the things I thought was interesting in this chart as well was that there was only one referral to teen court. And I thought we should figure out how we can increase that number significantly. We also didn't have any referrals for mental health or social services. We want to see that happen, right?
So up until recently, we haven't had the authority to refer to teen court, but we do have a meeting coming up. I can't remember if it's this week or next week in relation to getting that back going so that law enforcement can directly refer.
Right. Okay. Any other thoughts? Anybody see anything else on this chart that you want to talk about? No? So exciting. So here is a breakdown of the charge group. Remember, we had several of these charge groups that we looked at in the when I first reviewed the data with most people in the committee. So here are the different groups that we have people charged with, and of course there's a long line, but this is just 2 of them I think I pulled out. So several of these we only have charges for Black youth, right? And so some of these, I think we can look at individually, these charges, and go, is this how we want these issues to be dealt with? And is this what can we do about this? So again, one of the things I've pointed out several times is about like the drug violations or the disorderly conduct or calls for service. How can we redirect those to other places? Could these be directed to drug court? Could these be directed to some kind of behavioral or mental health program? Would that be another way of doing this without people having to move deeper into the system when they're showing need for something else? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Nobody wants to talk but Janae. Okay. All right. And then charge group 3, it has escape from custody or resisting arrest, fighting and afraid. Those are, I would say almost 90% of those are school-based, larceny and larceny from buildings. So again, all of these are only Black people were charged with these. And so what can we do about that, if there's anything at all? Thoughts? Okay, no. All right. So we've looked at this slide before, and again, I just wanted to reiterate. So what are some of the causes of red? And looking at what our data is showing us, what are some of the causes of these charge groups that we're seeing? So are they negative stereotypes, media images, risk factors? Different risk factors may be poverty, maybe a long list of different things, structural racism, historical disadvantage, maybe differential treatment with law enforcement, disparities in other systems, differential processing, structural bias, and implicit bias. Or is there anything else that you all would like to think about or say that some of the causes of red in Kinston?
I mean, it's all of that stuff, but to me, I mean, it's really no different than, anywhere else or just, what's going on in the world, period.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it doesn't really matter the age,
Yeah.
Just those biases are going to be there, I feel.
Yeah. So some people would say, I've heard a lot of people talk about maybe parenting as some of the issues that people want to talk about, or some people like to talk about, or I've heard, this might be one of those things that we've talked about, maybe disconnected families, or maybe even some learning barriers or disadvantages that some people have that maybe makes it a little more difficult for them to be able to fit into the traditional school environment. There are a lot of other things that I think can affect RED, and I think we should think about that in terms of what kind of solutions we try to create to address RED that we're seeing in our DMC RED plan. Okay. So now, one more quick video, and I think most of all have seen this, but I'm gonna show it to you anyway because I think it's a good video. If it'll show, okay.
Shoulder to shoulder, take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up, we're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. It's a $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm gonna make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
Okay. So I know some of us have seen that video before, but I think some of you may not have, but I think it's a really good one. So what did you think about it? What did you see even the second time you watched it this time? If this is the second time or third time?
That's very disheartening.
I mean, a lot of students I see and came in contact with, I know that's where a lot of the shutdown behaviors come from. Hear a lot of comments saying, you know, what's the point? You know, even trying, because they feel like they're never gonna win that race. Not that that's an excuse. You want to still try to keep them uplifted and try to get them to try their best. But when a person already has that in their mind, or that's what they've been hearing, you know, for so long or seeing for so long, I mean, it's hard to change it.
Anybody else? That was true, very true. Anybody else? Thoughts? There's no right or wrong answer. Are you all crying? Is that why you're quiet? Did it touch your spirit that good? Like you just was like, oh Lord, I want to do better.
Definitely very good video.
Yes, it was very good. I thought what was really interesting was the way the kid's faces changed, right? As it kept going on, you know, and the more questions he asked, even as it was a demonstration to the white kids or the more privileged kids, right? How even asking the questions had an effect on the kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I thought that was really interesting, but also that some of them ran harder probably than they ever would have just to try to win. And I thought that is something that we need to like really encourage people to feel, that your response to having all that stacked against you is to try even harder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody else wants to be emotional with me today? Okay, fine. But I just think it's an important video. It's on YouTube. If anybody wants it, I'll share it. But I think it's a really good way of illustrating, you know, how sometimes people can feel like things are stacked against them, and how the reality is that sometimes things are really stacked against people, and that we need to be really deliberate on how we can remove some of those barriers for people. All right. So with that in mind, we already had this discussion a little bit, but I wanted to ask again, what are some of the common disparity drivers? So after listening to what that coach was sharing with the young people, and after your personal experiences dealing with young people, what are some of the common disparity drivers that we know of, and are they all reflective here? So there's a couple I know aren't here. There's some of the things that would cause people to be in, I guess we could even say, difficult situations. If you can't talk, you can text it in the chat box. I mean, good grief, y'all. Make it feel like it's Friday. No thoughts? So I think, you know, one of the things that's not included is housing. I think housing, where you live, the environment that you live in, absolutely is a disparity driver, right? So if you live in a community that maybe might not look you know, a certain way, or might not have as much economic foundation as some other communities, that can really drive how young people feel and act about themselves, and how people treat them. Yeah. Anything
It's
else?
interesting that you said that, Linnea.
Yeah.
When you talked earlier about a lot of the phrase probably happening at the school, I
Mm-hmm.
was thinking like, that's true, but there's also a lot that happened in housing. And if you think about it, if you put, I don't know, 15 or 20, 25 kids living within a quarter of a block who
Mm-hmm.
are sharing that same little neighborhood, they're not allowed to have a basketball goal because it's against the rules. Most of them don't have bikes because they're not allowed to ride in the street. So you think about their
Mm-hmm.
limited activities, and then a whole bunch of kids are thrown into a small place.
Mm-hmm.
Naturally, that's going to lead to a phrase or fights or
Mm-hmm.
those type of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Any others that you all see?
Well, I know with our kids, employment and transportation are the
Mm-hmm.
two big things.
Mm-hmm.
Having access to transportation
Mm-hmm.
make huge differences for our family.
Absolutely.
Yes, definitely transportation.
And then employment, the ability to, even if it's just some kind of, part-time something, so they have some kind of independence,
Mm-hmm.
be able to get some fast food, do something, so they can have that little bit of independence means
Mm-hmm.
a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else? And there's, again, and I think part of why I say this is I think we kind of traditionally know what disparities are, but when people present themselves to you and they're asking for help, or they're uncomfortable, or somebody's mad, or something like that, they don't always say it the way that we have the checkbox to make it go, yeah, I know what that is. It appears sometimes differently, right? So it could be maybe a domestic violence situation. It could be all kinds of different things, and it could appear as my parents were fighting, or there's a neighborhood situation going on, and nobody wants to be there. It could be a lot of different things, if that makes sense. Okay, so moving on. So part of what we're going to do, or the work that we're doing, is that we are focusing on the institutional perspective, or the youth justice system, right? And so we're looking to change the stream and not the fish. And the young people are the fish. The people are the fish. Who are the fish? Question? Maybe not a question. Thoughts? What are we trying to change?
You said, are the people the fish?
Mm-hmm. What are we trying to change? If we're changing the stream and not the fish, who are the fish?
The kids.
The kids, right. And what is the stream?
World, the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Systems.
The systems, the agencies that we work for, those different things, those are the streams, right? So our focus is to change the system response to disparity, if we can. Okay. And so this is just a snapshot. This isn't what North Carolina system completely looks like. And I actually have that I'll show that to you before we wrap up, or I can send that to you. But so our focal point for our work is we are focusing on arrest, this decision point, key decision point, and why did we pick arrest? And suspension as well. What we picked.
I think we decided that that's something we could impact. Yeah, that we could make a change there and like divert instead of.
Absolutely. Any other reasons why we picked arrest and suspension?
That's where you're gonna see the most disparity.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if we can prevent people from going deeper into the system, right, we can block off some of those long-term consequences of being in the system, right? All right. You all are so exciting today. Oh my gosh, I just can't believe it. So that's it for us today. I wanted to give you all a chance to ask me any questions you might have, and I will share with you all the one that Jerry sent us, the updated version of what that lovely sheet looks like. Do you all care, or does anybody have any questions or anything that you've seen thus far that you would like to have a discussion about? Or no, you don't have to. Oh, no, that's not.
No, I think it makes sense. I mean, I just think that now it's a matter of kind of getting all the different folks kind of on board with making it happen. I mean, I do feel like we've got enough interest to make this happen.
Well, if nobody has any other questions or anything like that. Everybody's so quiet today. Does anybody want to see do you all want me to forward you out the decision chart, the North Carolina chart that Jerry sent us? Have you all seen that? I think Dilday shared it with us a while ago. Yes, okay, I'll email that out to everybody. Anybody, anything else that people would like to talk about? All right, well, we are wrapping up on time yet again. I'm doing so much better about this and nobody says anything. All right, everybody, have a great day. And are we meeting again? We should be finished next week. So did you want to meet next week or did you want to meet the week after? One last time.
The week after.
Week after? 2 weeks? So that would be.
Yeah, I know next week's a court week for us, so.
So the November the 3rd would be the next Tuesday?
That's a court week for us.
The 3rd sounds good to me.
The 3rd?
The 3rd is a court week for us.
Oh, the whole week is a court week.
No,
Okay.
no. The 3rd is not a court week. The 27th is the court week.
Okay, okay. So the 3rd will work good. So then we'll plan on meeting on the 3rd. And that will be our last meeting. I think we should be done by then. All right, everybody. And we have a data and policy meeting tomorrow. Those of you that want to join us, right, Kalia?
All right, take care.
Okay, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Linnea.
You're welcome.